Hello, Somerville. My name is Ed Halloran. Welcome to the Somerville Labor Show. This is another episode, and we continue to produce these shows during the pandemic and broadcast remotely. We're dedicated to continue to produce shows during the pandemic that affects nearly every sector of labor, of employment. As we broadcast this show, unemployment in America has surged to an all-time high not seen since the Great Depression of approximately 14.7%. I'd like to begin the show by quoting a gentleman that I saw on a local radio station. On a local TV station here. His name is Dr. Selwyn Vick, Senior Vice President and the Dean of the University of Birmingham, Alabama School of Medicine. Here's some of the things that he said, some of the quotes that I found quite telling. Social detriments of health predicts our future health. Inequities, access to good health, poverty, living in high-density areas, limited opportunities for economic growth. All of those things can have an impact on whether someone is actually able to manage their health or able to prevent chronic illnesses like heart disease, obesity, hypertension, diabetes, and also the poorest have the least access to health care. The statistics are very telling, and the numbers reflect that people of color and the elderly whose health is compromised make up the largest amount of deaths across America, which is now approaching in Massachusetts 5,000. African Americans account for more than 1/3 of the COVID-19 deaths in the US. My guest for the show is a producer and radio show host titled Let's Talk About Race on Boston Free Radio, and is also a Harvard Law graduate and a yoga instructor. And Wong, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm fine, Ed. Thank you for having me on your show. Nothing is more important right now than looking at this coronavirus. We all know that.
Well, you know what? I don't know if I'm saying it right, but it is a namaste. Am I correct? Namaste?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, I just want to make sure I have it correct. I also have Greg Hill, who's on the show. Greg is a community activist in the city of Somerville, working very hard for the community, has been doing it for years. He is also the assistant producer on our labor show. Greg, it's good to see you. What are you doing today?
Thank you, Ed and Diane. I'm happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to an engaging session.
Yes.
Excellent. Me too. So, Diane, I want to start the show with a question to you. And as a radio show host and what you've been doing for a while now, what prompted you? I know this is going to be a very long answer, but we can just, give us like a mini sort of answer on what prompted you to have your own show about. Let's talk about how did that occur?
Okay, let me be succinct. I was born into a multiracial family. And so race, and we mainly lived in the Black community. So that has, I saw race from all different perspectives, a lot of struggling over who was better than who else, even within the family. So race doesn't just affect Black people. It doesn't just affect, it's not just coming from white people. There's just this racism and racial strife all around. So what made me decide to do a show, I went in and I did the introduction. I hadn't even thought about it. And so the first thing that came to me when they said, do you want to do a radio show? I said, yeah, sure, why not? And they said, well, what would be the name of it? I said, well, let's talk about race. So, so here we are. I have found that Black people in general, I can speak for myself as a Black woman. And so Black people are totally capable of talking about race. In fact, we talk about it all the time. It's a big topic of conversation, and it always has been. White people, on the other hand, are adverse to talking about race, and I have some feeling about why that is. And we can talk about that later.
Okay. I appreciate that. And what spurs people on. Me personally, I was just asked hey, what do you think about having a labor show, Ed? And I said, I never really thought of it. And all the years I've been involved in labor, and it just kind of took on a life of its own. I'm really glad that I do it. It's just opened my eyes up to so many different things and given me so many different relationships with people, like the both of you, and I'm very appreciative of that. Diane, in my opening, if ever there was a time to bring us together to heal and correct these health concerns, wouldn't this be right now be our moment in time to do that? And how do you feel about that?
Well, we have, you mean we as a people, as like the people of the United States?
Yeah, I mean, we as a people, let's put it this way, putting the nation's disagreement aside and work towards that common goal that we're always talking about.
I mean, but that's just talk. We're always just, that's just always, has always just been talk. So when we look at the coronavirus and you give statistics like 1/3 of the infections rates, the infection rate, and then 1/3 of the death rate are, let's just say Black people, that's not a surprise. Why would that be a surprise? We as a people, now I'm speaking of we as the people of the United States, have always thrived with the notion that Black people were on the bottom of everything. The last people, and there's only been kicking and screaming to keep Black people out of being hired for anything except for servile positions. And so there's no surprise that Black people don't have the wealth to have the insurance that they need. Black people have been kept out of housing by intentionally through the government and intentionally through racial covenants and intentionally through everything. So, Ed, it's not a surprise.
Thank you. Greg, same question to you. This time, at this particular point in time, it's a time for us to pull, do you believe it's time for us to pull our resources together now and fight towards this common goal that we're gonna talk about later on in the show, my common goal. How do you feel about that, Greg?
Well, Diane and both of you have mentioned that in this time of crisis, we need to create new coalitions, think about new ways of solving these persistent problems, racial and economic inequity. We need, this is an unprecedented, horrific time. And from what I've heard and seen, though I'm certainly no expert on it, that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought to the fore even more starkly the inequities that communities of color have faced. I mean, look at the pandemic rates of infection in places like Brockton, Revere, Chelsea. And then you see the Latino meat packers being blamed for the closing down of the meat packing. It's the same old racism all over again. And so we need to take some bold new approaches with new coalitions to grapple with this. We cannot go back to the old ways of doing things, whether at the presidential or the state or local level. There's no going back.
I do look at it. I remember 9/11 just like everyone else. And I remember back then, Mayor of Boston, Thomas Menino, said, this day will change us for the rest of our life, where we're going to be doing things. And certainly this is going to change things going forward. And what's really concerning to me, we're trying to cover every single aspect of the COVID-19 on the labor show. And these nursing homes is certainly a tragedy. It's really something that really is just so difficult to grasp. And whether you're, Black or white or Latino, it's affecting everybody, and things have to change across the board the way it's done. I just want to get your thoughts on that, Diane, on the nursing home issue.
On the nursing home issue?
Please.
Well, okay, let's look at the nursing home issue. and the issue of the vulnerable elderly population, of which I'm a part. So, but okay, so we say that, and I agree with you that it's a good time to do this. But while we're saying that, on the other hand, we see armed people threatening at state government levels to try to get the country to open up. And so what I hear people saying is that we want the right to harm. We don't even care if it's our own grandmother in a nursing home. She's had a life. Now it's the time for us to live. So if we've got a country with maybe half the population that want the right to harm, we're going against all over the world. Every other country in the world that I know of is closing down to try to keep the elderly and everybody else, whoever needs to be saved, safe, but not in the United States. In the United States, we want the right to harm. We want the right to kill off all these elderly in nursing homes. And the reason they're in nursing homes is because we don't want them, now I'm speaking for some people, we don't want them in our homes. We don't want to have to spend time tending to them. So we've already cast them off into nursing homes.
They've
So
been warehoused.
we don't care if they die. So let's just look at it with our eyes open. I agree with you, Ed. Now is the time. But if we don't take this time.
Well, you know what? I'm taking the high road because that's what and I understand, there's a lot of pent up frustration. And I guess that we need to try to pull this thing together and make some sense of all of it. So let me just say this, okay? The virus has found every conceivable weakness, not only in the human body, but in the healthcare system as well. And its deficiencies in our government. I guess that's what you had just told me, Diane, in a sense. So I have to recognize courageous healthcare workers, the frontline workers, the nurses on the front lines with no PPE or little PPE, the supermarket workers, the workers, et cetera, that are allowing people to stay home right now. Greg, I have a question for you. What are your thoughts on the position of these frontline workers, and have they been put in a position where they can't stay home? What do you think is like? How do you think you have the protection that they've given you? What are your thoughts on the frontline workers right now?
Well, the labor unions a labor union has always helped people get a leg up in terms of protections in the best examples. I think that labor unions and community groups have to keep an eye on whether these vulnerable workers are actually being protected. I think that needs citizen monitoring. And where it falls short, it should be brought up short. These things have to see the light of day because, industry is scrambling and there's going to be furloughs and they're going to be cutting corners. And that is going to put people at risk. And we can't allow for working people who are most vulnerable to be left in that position.
And that's the reason why I said that every conceivable thing that you can think of, it has put a chink in the armor of just about everything that is weak. And that's what we're looking at right now. The other thing I wanted to was that Governor Baker is organizing an advisory board to get, whenever that may be, get to our new normal once this state reopens. And my understanding is that labor doesn't have a seat at the table. I can't, it's unimaginable that you wouldn't have labor sitting at the table, letting people know exactly what the workers are and how we're going to protect our workers going forward right now. It's almost like, and I interviewed Donna Kelly Williams, who's the president of 200,000 nurses in Massachusetts, and we had a great discussion, but I can't imagine the hospital administrators being at this meeting, but then having Kelly Williams there, or someone like that from their union, to let them know how they feel and how we need to be protected in the future and how to avoid this. Yeah, you have any answer on that, Greg? How do you feel about with Baker going on right now with that?
Well, the fact that he's excluded not only labor, but the creative leaders, leaders in the arts, but labor should have a place at the table because working people are the most vulnerable or not working. You know, so many people can't work from home. They're not in the gig economy. They're if labor is not at the table, then it's really not an authentic and fair approach to any kind of reopening.
Diane, how do you feel about that, about labor not being at the table on this advisory board on the reopening of the state weapons?
Or people of color, for that matter. How many of them are part of the reopening?
Yeah, I want to ask Diane that question too.
Well, yeah, you know, this is, and again, this is not a surprise. Look at how labor has been eroded in this country. Labor unions used to have clout, and so that's not true anymore. So what I can say is that I agree with you if what you're saying is that there's nothing that is more critical at this juncture, that we're, even though we've always known that poor people of color have been pushed aside, that's been intentional. So we've always known that. But now that the spotlight is on everything, and if we're looking at one thing that we might be able to do, and I think it's through coalitions. So looking at who should be at the table, I don't know. But if we look at who is at the table and then try to push in there and get them to pull more coalitions or find, I don't know how to do it, but what we have to have is clearly more people at the table, but we also have to be at the table with a singular demand, so to speak, clearly a demand. And that demand in this state of Massachusetts, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, is for universal health coverage. So if we're going to keep pouring the poor people into the essential workers, and they're going to bring us our food, and they're going to pick up the garbage, and they're going to do all the work that nobody else wants to do. But what we need to happen to allow us to stay home or to just be in safety, then the one thing that we need to do is to have health coverage, health care that's universal, that covers everybody. There are countries like Greece, poor countries, and they have health coverage. If you're a guest, if you're a visitor in Greece, you're covered under the health care. There's no reason not to have that, no reason whatsoever. We should demand that.
Now, I agree with you on that 100%. And that's something that we're going to be discussing in future shows as well, because, you know, this is incredibly important. I've asked, what you raised there, Diane, is something that I have asked from just about every guest since this pandemic began. I want to move to something, to another quote that I have here from a gentleman. His name is Mark Morial, who is the president and CEO of the National Urban League, who stated that they have been hit with a triple whammy. Triple whammy. The workers most at risk are essential workers. They can't afford to work from home. Black people have high death rates of COVID-19 and they have high unemployment. Access to public health care is critical to essential workers, just as you said, Diane, and people that live in high density areas really are affected by this. Greg, what are your thoughts on what Mark Morrell said here on those points?
I think he's right on every point. I believe that we need universal health care. As Diane has pointed out, other countries have them. Why don't we have it? Because the corporations, big pharma, what have you, they don't want it. The insurance companies don't want it. they want to be the ones in charge. Now, it seems it wasn't so long ago that medicine could, we didn't have corporate medicine, but now that's what we have. And that is the big roadblock, because every time, even Medicare was fought against by big business. Social Security was fought against. Look at the pushback that Franklin Delano Roosevelt had with trying to bring Social Security, during the Great Depression. So we're kind of, not only are we headed for another Great Depression, but we're also headed for the same kind of opposition that FDR faced for, in terms of universal health care.
Let me ask this question, Diane. What is the first thing that legislation should do, our legislators should address as soon, either it be now or either it be, when they can get to it, it better be sooner than later. What is the first thing that we have to address right away in order to stop, stop this from continuing on once we can hopefully get their hands around this and slow it down a bit? What's the thing legislation needs to do?
Well, the problem with the legislators is the same problem that the Trump has with legislators, or not just legislators, the same problem he has, which is they have somebody else in their ear, and the somebody else in their ear is saying, we're going to give you $100,000 here and $1 million there for your campaign, but not if you take up this cause. And so that is the problem. And so I'm not big on trying to get the legislators. I'm saying let's have people. The people have to decide. We have to decide that it's important, and we have to decide it's enough. And we have to decide that this is a cause that we're all going to pay attention to. So right now, are people paying attention? Probably not. They're watching Netflix. Who knows what they're doing, but they're not paying attention to this because it's not affecting them. They are calling out for food, and somebody knocks on their door and gives it to them. And they've got unemployment, and they've got, or they're working from home. This is not hitting the people that have anything. It's hitting the people, the essential workers, the ones that have to go out there and work. Who really gives a flying anything about them? Who has ever?
Well,
because all we ever care about is ourselves. So until it impacts us, it's got to impact us.
I would like to think that this show and shows like yours and people like Greg, we're people who do care. You know that, and
Absolutely.
I think our voices will raise that to a level where we can get something done. Greg, let me ask, on the heels of that answer from Diane, I know how difficult it is to try and get something done universally, the entire United States. I've recently asked actually Erica Idahoven, who's running for state representative, on something in Massachusetts itself. What do you think the likelihood is that we could get something done in Massachusetts passed? Whether, the single payer Medicare for all, because there's that loophole that some people have been talking about. They've got this, at least give it to us over the age of 50. But that's not going to help either, I don't think. What are your thoughts on that, on Massachusetts itself being the leader in this?
Well, as we've alluded to before, we have to build coalitions, maybe coalitions of I think it has to be with new places, new faces, old places, old faces. I think we have to think outside the box and build coalitions all across, because only through organizing and sitting down at the table with all of these affected and and our citizen representatives, if you will, not necessarily in the legislature, and cobble together a single message that we can take to the State House en masse, is anything going to happen? So it's coalition building is the start.
let's do this. Let's bring the Green New Deal into this just for a brief second, okay? Now, I know a little bit about it, and I don't know as much as some people do, but I can tell you that the people who are representing the Green New Deal right now, and as you know, we are attempting to have this labor climate change summit, and to get those two groups to work together with the Green New Deal. Is this an opportune time to put those two things together and get the Green New Deal involved in healthcare? Well, if not globally, I mean, well, at least in the United States, can we get something done in Massachusetts? Do you think the Green New Deal would blend to this?
Is this
Diane,
for me or Diane? Huh?
Diane.
For me? Okay.
Yeah.
First of all, let me say this. I 100% agree with what Greg just said. And let me emphasize what he said. We have to build coalitions, grassroots. This has to spread across the grassroots. And then those coalitions have to have a single-eyed focus. We all have to agree on one thing coming forward. And now what you just said, Ed, and one of the things as I've looked at the climate change and the labor and everybody, every one of those groups has their own focus. And so the thing is that, is it important enough? Do we care enough about people in nursing homes in Massachusetts? Not in Michigan, not in Wisconsin, but in Massachusetts. Do we care enough about the vulnerable people that we can come together and single-eyed, one mission? And let's take it to the State House just like all these other groups, but instead of marching up with our guns demanding opening, let's march up and demand that our vulnerable are protected, and we want universal health coverage. Let's do that. Let's have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people show up. It'll be warm. Let's show up on the State House steps and demand one demand.
We should be taking care. We should be basically taking care of our own house first. Do we agree with that? I mean, should we be doing something on this state level of Massachusetts first before we move anywhere else with this? Greg.
Well, I believe we can, if we can accomplish those coalitions, we can set the example and build coalitions, on a regional basis, a statewide basis, a regional basis, and a national basis. But we have to make sure that what the coalitions are involved in, there will be a number of bullet points that will differ from organization to organization. But remember, in terms of coalition building, remember that Let's Talk About Race was a show about Let's Talk About Race and had its agenda. And then the labor show was a labor-focused show. And yet here we are together. This is a start of our own coalition, but we think outside the box. We know that we're coalition minded, and I think the Green New Deal is part of that, because Trump has rolled back all these environmental regulations that were put in place brick by brick, and the climate change is still the bigger elephant in the room. It's going to sit on everybody, and it's going to, if this COVID-19, if you think this is bad, well, the climate change is going to unleash a whole bunch more if we the citizens don't put things back together again, like restore the environmental regulations that are so necessary to keep the human species and the rest of the species alive. I mean, I may be talking kind of broad here, but we start small and we think big, and we go from big back to small again. It's
Greg, I had in my moment of despair in my lifetime, and I've had quite a few of them, I had a gentleman come up to me one day and tell me, "This too shall pass." And I do believe it will pass, but if you've been saying, as Diane's been saying, you guys are completely correct. We have to do it. It's to be done with the coalition. That's the only way you can get things done. The people are the ones who are going to have to get something like that done. I want to give you a couple statistics that I have here. Massachusetts is the second most expensive state for healthcare insurance. It's causing 1 in 5 Massachusetts residents saddled with medical debt. And so what Eric Eidhoven told me is that we need a single payer Medicare healthcare system for all Massachusetts, making healthcare a human right for all residents. Not only is accessible and affordable health care the moral issue of our time, it will save $21 billion annually in the state of Massachusetts. Now, I asked her how that would get done, but you'd have to watch the other show that I did to find out about that. But she was a very, very good guest and really has some good ideas on what can be done. And, we're paying a lot of money into the system, and you're right, we do have a lot of issues, especially with, the insurance companies and a lot of other things that are involved right now. This couple of things that really have concerned me when watching a lot of this. I mean, I know that there's been so many things going on right now. Doctors being arrested while helping the homeless. A young lady just passed away after being tested twice in New York City. And she was fighting one hell of a battle herself. And it says here that I think the woman's name was Zoe Mungin. And people say that the very biases she sought to bring attention to ultimately played a role in her death. That was in the Boston Globe just a while ago. And it's really been very difficult to sit and watch a lot of this because, yes, a lot of it is painful. We're getting close to the end. And so I want to give Diane an opportunity to, maybe give us a little wrap up and a close out. I think we're going to do more of these.
I like that. So a couple of things and that I'm aware of that, especially for issues of Black issues, they're always picked up for the desire to have Black votes or Black participation, but then they're forgotten about as we move on. So what I agree with Greg, that coalitions, and I think that if you look at people of color generally and Black people in particular, that people will agree that universal health care will certainly benefit. And that's what Bernie said, but he didn't want to look at reparations so much for that. But the reason I have some feeling that we'll be able to keep our eye on the prize and won't get universal health coverage and then forget about everything else is just because of what else we're looking at, which is climate change. So that's not going away. And it's exacerbated because of all the changes that are currently going on with this administration. So here we've got the coronavirus coming in like this, but the big overwhelming big thing here is called climate change. So, and that's pretty soon it's gonna overtake everybody. And it's gonna make it so that the people who are maybe now more desirous of closing their eyes and not seeing that we're all in this together and that we're all one won't be able to. So I'm thinking that the way the universe is situated, we're all going to have to work these things out, and we're not going to be able to forget. So I'm saying, yes, we need to work on universal health coverage. Now, real universal health coverage, I'm not buying into this one payer system. Free. We need free health coverage. Tax people and let them pay for that because we all live in this together. So, but yes, climate change is not going away, and it's going to squeeze us so that we're going to have to look at all of our issues. But right now, universal health coverage, yes, will benefit everybody.
I keep asking the same question over and over. What's really concerning to me is the fact that I don't know if we're unfunded somehow in our healthcare system that has caused us to overlook all of these concern shortages that we have of PPE. It's completely unacceptable. Greg, you can speak on this just briefly, please.
Well, I've had my own issues trying to find masks for some of my senior colleagues in Mass Senior Action Council. I was lucky to find some online, but it's been a scramble, and I can just imagine that, you know, I have some resources, but there are so many others who don't have those resources. How are they surviving? I mean, I haven't been able to find the antiseptic wipes anywhere. I went to Home Depot and they were out of the disposable gloves. But, you know, I have mobility and I have some agility, but I can't help thinking that, you know, so many other seniors and, you know, seniors for people of color, double whammy, you know, good Lord, how are they surviving if getting a hold of personal protective equipment is so sketchy? And of course, the first responders and healthcare workers should be getting the N95 masks. And of course, somebody pointed out that any kind of face covering will do the job in public, but you know, the masks are still needed, and you know, the state should be providing these. I mean, the city of Somerville was going to supply every senior with 2 masks, but how far will that go? And that's been sort of tied up in bureaucracy.
Well, look I have to say one thing. I really do. I have to say the city of Somerville, they always do a good job when it comes to, you know, leading the way and doing things that need to be done. You know, I'm really proud of that city. It's a good city. We've talked about that's for another show about the pricing to live in the city of Somerville and the difficulty and affordable housing. I'm talking about that on the
You
labor
can
show for
speak
so
to
long.
that.
What's that, Greg?
Many of your members have had to move out of the city because it becomes unaffordable for your union members and others.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. So anyway, I want to close out the show, but I want to thank both of you so much for being here. And I also have something I want to leave all 3 of us with here. I always like to think about how we're going to end the show and what needs to be said that's at the appropriate time. So I have a couple of historic quotes here from 2 presidents that understood the urgency in America that we're currently experiencing, and they also accepted the responsibility for their actions. Quote number 1, the only thing to fear is fear itself. And I'm going to give you what I got on a history page on this is, in campaign speeches, he favored a buoyant, optimistic, gently paternal tone spiced with humor, but his first inaugural address took on an unusually solemn religious quality. And for good reason. By 1933, the Depression had reached its depth. Roosevelt's first inaugural address outlined in broad terms how he hoped to govern and reminded Americans that the nation's common difficulties concerned only material things. The second quote is from Harry S. Truman. The buck stops here. I'm sure we remember that one. But it's a phrase popularized by U.S. President Harry S. Truman, who kept a sign with that phrase on his desk in his Oval Office. The phrase refers to the notion that the president has to make the decisions and accept the ultimate responsibilities for those decisions. So, you know what? I think that's what we need in our country today, and that's what we need in our lives. And I just wanted to add that. Now, Greg, as you're the assistant producer of the show, and you already got one of these, so I whenever I can see Diane again, we have to get her one of these because it's appropriate in this particular point in time. Okay.
I like that. I like that. Okay,
well,
great.
I like it. I love it.
I like
always,
that.
you know,
Well, see,
you know,
that's the whole, that's, okay. That's the whole point of the whole thing. the reason that we're having this struggle and the reason we're all dispersed everywhere is because we're not focused in on everybody. We're only focused in on myself, my family, my life. And so until we start to see that we really are all in this together, and I think these kind of crises are helping us to see that.
Diane, how can people tune into your show?
Tune into the show.
Tune in. Do they tune in? Do they stream in? How do they get to your show?
The easiest thing to do right now is go to the Somerville Media Center and do the on demand, because it's spotty. I'm not keeping up every week getting it back to Somerville Media or to the Boston Free Radio, but I'll do that. I'm going to start doing that. I have a lot of old shows. You can listen to all of them.
Right, I'm sure there's a lot of valuable information on there as well.
Okay.
I can only imagine.
Yeah,
Greg?
do my SoundCloud. I'll give you something, and then you put that up on your show, and people can listen.
All right, perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. We're happy to put it out there. Greg, it's always a pleasure to see you, and I do appreciate you being on the show as well.
Good to see you again, Ed, and we'll let people know that we're hoping to set up a Labor Show podcast on Boston Free Radio soon to spread the word.
That's going to be exciting. I think.
Yep.
What do we have? We have our first show is going to be about what?
Donna, the interview you had on April 11th with Donna Kelly Williams. Kelly Williams, who is, of course, the president of the Massachusetts Nursing Association.
Yeah.
That was a very telling show, Ed, because she spoke from experience, and she's, the leader of thousands of nurses, frontline nurses in the state. Yeah. And she's from Somerville.
Yeah.
She's from Lincoln Park, Marion Street. Yep, right near my mom's house. So thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. And, in unity there's strength. When we fight, we win. We love you all out there, and please stay safe. Thank you all so much.
Take care. This is only the beginning.
Bye.
Bye, Diane. Bye, Ed.
Bye.
Great talking.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, signing off.
Bye.
Thank you.
Convince myself there's one thing that I can do.